I was a big fan of your campaign for president. And one of the suggestions that I thought that you brought to the table that was just really underappreciated was that of creating a Department of Peace. Obviously, the United States still has a tremendous influence on the world stage. And there's no reason that that influence can't be used for good means, for diplomatic means, rather than militaristic or imperialist means. As you said in your campaign so beautifully, peace building is both preferable to and less costly than war. We spend more money on our military than the next 9 militaries in the world. And I think that overall your campaign had some of the best, most creative approaches to talking about foreign policy, even more so than other candidates that were running that also made foreign policy a big part of their campaign. I think yours was just, so underrated. And foreign policy is obviously the most neglected and usually underreported on aspect of a presidential agenda. So how do you think the anti-war movement stands under a Biden presidency? And also, what do you think we can do to meaningfully resist these realities as activist citizens, especially in an age of increased drone warfare, the horrors of which are obviously less visible to your average American than usually wartime is? Obviously, during the Vietnam War or even the Iraq War, the anti-war movement was so much more robust.
Absolutely. A young man about you guys' age said to me once, one of my events, he said, "Miss Williamson, you're just an aging hippie." He said, "You guys were just all sex, drugs, and rock and roll." And I remember responding, that was just part of the day. The rest of the day, we stopped a war. What have you done? We took on the military-industrial complex. We protested the war in Vietnam. So you're right. When I was younger, there was a ban the bomb. There was a lot of talk not only about U.S. military, certainly involvement in Vietnam. And remember, a lot of that had to do with the fact that there was a draft then. Yeah. So it wasn't just other people. It was our brothers, our sons, our friends, our loved ones. That was a large part of it. And also all of the conversation about the nuclear industry, ban the bomb. And what has happened now is such a fatigue has set in on such a deep level that you hear some bitching and moaning and complaining about the military industrial complex, but no serious resistance to it beyond what you mentioned in the presidential campaign. I thought it was extraordinary how little conversation there was about foreign policy, although I'm also not surprised because I see how the system really operates now. And I see what they did to Tulsi and I see what they did to me, because to take on the military industrial complex, just like taking on Big Pharma or any of these other specific entities that are making billion-dollar profits off humans suffering, is to go beyond the pre-prescribed conversation that the political elite has said we will allow in. They say you have choice, but how much choice do you really have when they are so adamant about nullifying the voice of anyone who represents any kind of serious alternative to what they are talking about? Bernie also, of course, talked about Yemen, which is an extremely important issue. But for the most part, it was amazing when you saw the debate stage, et cetera. There were no questions about it whatsoever. So I had heard Dennis Kucinich years ago, a congressman, I hope you know who he is, talking about the Department of Peace. And you mentioned earlier, when you were asking the question, you talked about diplomatic efforts. We now have a defense budget of somewhere around, $780 billion. Our State Department budget is $40 billion. So that right there tells you. Now, we all know what's going on here. They make it sound complicated, but it's really simple. There's money to be made on war. The problem is, there are billions of dollars to be made off for a war economy, 53 cents of every dollar spent on defense-related expenditures. But what about your chance and the chance of my great-grandchildren and your grandchildren to actually live on this earth if we continue with the trajectory that we're on? Now, this is actually not rocket science. There are ways to wage peace, just as there are ways to wage war. It used to be decades ago, people believed in a more allopathic model of health and healing. You didn't really feel you were responsible for taking care of your body. You didn't really feel you were responsible for lifestyle or exercise choices that led to health, creating good health. You just hoped you didn't get sick. And then if you did get sick, you went to the doctor and hoped that there would be some external remedy that would suppress or eradicate the symptom. we transitioned. A lot of that transition into a more holistic model had to do with the AIDS crisis, actually, historically. But people began to realize you can't just wait till you get sick. You have to consciously, proactively cultivate health. There are things you do to cultivate health through diet, through exercise, through lifestyle, etc. And so there was an understanding that health is not the absence of sickness. Sickness is the absence of health. As we move into the 21st century, move more deeply, we're already in it. In every field except politics, there's the realization of a more holistic, integrative, whole person paradigm that is necessary in order to actually solve problems. War is the absence of peace. Peace is not the absence of war. So if you continue to act in ways that make violence almost inevitable, of course, there will be eruption of violence. And then what we have in the United States today is that's okay, basically, because there's so much money to be made. We have to change our thinking. How do you create peace? There are 4 elements which are factors that, when present, statistically indicate there will be a greater incidence of peace and a lower incidence of violence. Number 1, expansion of economic opportunities for women. Number 2, an expansion of educational opportunities for children. Number 3, the reduction of violence against women. And number 4, the amelioration of unnecessary human despair. So that's where we should be putting money. And also, I don't know if you read the book by Ronan Farrow called War on Peace. It also really tracks. I'm sorry. Yeah, the War on Peace. That really tracks how over the last few decades, the State Department has been released from its more traditional role and placed more at the service of military options and at the service also of whatever huge multinational corporations want. For instance, Trump's first Secretary of State had been the CEO of Exxon, yep. And how even now, with the war with the United States for the sake of an arms deal, giving aerial support to the war in Yemen that is starving tens of thousands, including children, it's worth noting that Pompeo's response when he was asked how the United States could do something so profoundly immoral, how our foreign policy could be so craven that we were willing for blood money to participate in aerial support, without which the Crown Prince would not be able to prosecute that war. Pompeo's response was, sometimes you can have strategic partnerships with people who do not share your values, which means you've surrendered your values. So this is the conversation that has to begin. We can't just fight the military-industrial complex. We have to understand why and a change from a war economy to a peace economy. Now, when people say, oh, but there's so much money to be made, you've got a lot of people who work for the military-industrial complex. And by the way, I'm not saying there should be no strong military, but we spend hundreds of billions of dollars above and beyond what our military leaders actually say that we need. Right. And we now know that even here in the United States, investment in infrastructure, investment in education, investment in things that actually help people live better lives actually produces more monetary success than does a war economy. And that war economy can be transitioned. Just like we can transition from a dirty economy to a clean economy, we can transition from a war economy to a peace economy. And I think that the left needs to be very careful and acknowledge that there are thousands of people whose jobs are part of this transition, yeah. And there should be no one left behind in that transition. And I think sometimes we are perceived as not caring about things like that, and we should care. And Absolutely. That transition should be careful.